The concept of the undead has fascinated humanity across cultures, and ancient Egypt stands as one of the most intriguing civilizations to grapple with ideas of life, death, and undeath. While we often associate zombies with modern horror films and popular culture, the ancient Egyptians possessed their own complex mythology surrounding the dead who walked among the living. Their sophisticated beliefs about the afterlife, preservation of the body, and the potential dangers of improper burial rituals reveal a society deeply concerned with what might happen when the natural order between life and death was disrupted. Understanding how ancient Egyptians conceptualized their version of the undead offers us valuable insight into both their worldview and the universal human anxiety about mortality and what lies beyond. In contemporary popular culture, zombies are typically depicted as reanimated corpses that have lost their humanity and wander mindlessly in search of human flesh or brains to consume. These creatures are often portrayed as slow-moving, decaying bodies with limited cognitive function, driven purely by an insatiable hunger and stripped of their former personalities and memories. The modern zombie represents a complete loss of the soul or consciousness that once inhabited the body, leaving only a shell animated by some supernatural or viral force. This terrifying image has become a staple of horror entertainment, symbolizing fears about contagion, loss of individual identity, and societal collapse. The zombie apocalypse narrative, in particular, has captured imaginations worldwide, presenting scenarios where the dead overwhelm the living and civilization crumbles under the weight of an unstoppable plague. Ancient Egyptian mythology, however, approached the concept of the undead in remarkably different ways, rooted in their elaborate beliefs about death, mummification, and the afterlife journey. The Egyptians didn't have a single word or concept that directly translates to our modern understanding of zombies, but they certainly feared the dead returning in harmful ways. Their mythology included various entities that could be considered undead, such as the restless dead who were improperly buried, or those who failed to pass successfully into the afterlife. These beings were not mindless creatures, but rather souls trapped between worlds, often possessing intelligence and specific grudges or unfinished business that compelled their return. The ancient Egyptians believed that a person consisted of multiple spiritual components, including the Ka, life force, Ba, personality, and Akheaj, transfigured spirit, and disruption to any of these elements could result in supernatural problems. One of the most significant aspects of ancient Egyptian undead mythology centered on the concept of the restless dead, those whose burial rites were incomplete, or who died violent or untimely deaths. These unfortunate souls were believed to wander the earth, unable to complete their journey to the afterlife, and potentially dangerous to the living. The Egyptians went to extraordinary lengths to ensure proper burial practices, precisely because they feared the consequences of failing to do so, believing that an improperly prepared body could result in a vengeful spirit or a trapped soul. Unlike modern zombies who are essentially animated corpses without consciousness, these ancient Egyptian undead retained their memories, personalities, and often sought justice or revenge for wrongs committed against them in life. The fear wasn't of mindless consumption, but of targeted supernatural retribution from those who had been wronged or neglected. The ancient Egyptian practice of mummification itself reveals their complex relationship with preserving the body for the afterlife, which stands in stark contrast to the decaying, deteriorating bodies of modern zombie fiction. Egyptians believed that the physical body needed to be preserved so that the various components of the soul could reunite with it in the afterlife, transforming into an ache that could dwell with the gods. The elaborate embalming process, removal of organs, and careful wrapping were all designed to maintain the body's integrity for eternity, not to create a walking corpse, but to facilitate a successful transition to the next world. When things went wrong in this process, or when tombs were violated and mummies disturbed, the Egyptians believed serious supernatural consequences could follow. Tomb curses and warnings inscribed on burial chambers weren't just superstitious threats, but reflected genuine beliefs about the protective anger of the deceased and the gods who watched over them. The difference between ancient Egyptian concepts of the undead and modern zombie mythology reflects fundamentally different cultural anxieties and worldviews that shaped how each society understood death and its aftermath. Modern zombies often represent fears about loss of humanity, epidemic disease, and the breakdown of social order, emerging from a secular worldview where death is seen as a final biological endpoint that can only be reversed through unnatural means. In contrast, ancient Egyptian undead arose from a deeply spiritual cosmology where death was merely a transition, and the greatest fear was not dying, but failing to achieve immortality in the afterlife. The Egyptians viewed the body and soul as interconnected but separable, with specific rituals and moral requirements necessary to ensure safe passage to the afterlife, while modern zombie narratives typically treat consciousness and the body as inseparable until some external force reanimates the flesh without the mind. These contrasting approaches reveal how each culture's dominant beliefs about the nature of existence, the soul, and what happens after death shaped their respective visions of the undead. Various theories have emerged among scholars attempting to explain the origins and significance of undead beliefs in ancient Egyptian culture, drawing on archaeological evidence, religious texts, and comparative mythology. Some researchers suggest that Egypt's sophisticated mummification practices and elaborate tomb constructions themselves may have given rise to anxieties about the dead, as the very preservation of bodies created a physical presence of the deceased that remained visible and accessible to the living. Others point to the harsh realities of ancient life, where plague, famine, and warfare meant that improper burials were sometimes unavoidable, leading to cultural narratives that explained and warned against such failures. The economic value of tombs and their contents may have also played a role, as fears of undead vengeance could serve as supernatural enforcement against tomb robbery, supplementing physical security measures with psychological deterrents that transcended earthly law. The psychological dimension of these beliefs cannot be understated, as the ancient Egyptian concepts of the undead likely served important social and emotional functions in helping people process grief and maintain ethical behavior. The belief that the dead could return if wronged or neglected may have reinforced social obligations to properly care for deceased family members and maintain their tombs, ensuring continuity of cultural practices across generations. These beliefs also provided an explanation for misfortune or tragedy that struck individuals or communities, attributing such events to supernatural causes rather than random chance or human error. From an anthropological perspective, the elaborate mythology surrounding death and the potential for harmful returns of the deceased created a comprehensive system that addressed the universal human struggle with mortality, while reinforcing important cultural values about family duty, proper ritual observance, and moral behavior that would be judged in the afterlife. The impact of ancient Egyptian undead mythology extended far beyond their own civilization, influencing later cultures and ultimately contributing to the rich tapestry of undead legends that persist in various forms today. When ancient Egyptian tombs were opened by archaeologists in the 19th and 20th centuries, tales of curses and mummies' revenge captured public imagination, spawning countless stories, films, and popular culture representations that blended ancient beliefs with modern sensibilities. The curse of King Tutankhamun's tomb, whether real or imagined, became legendary and helped cement the image of the vengeful mummy in Western popular culture. These narratives, while often distorting or sensationalizing actual Egyptian beliefs, nonetheless demonstrate the enduring power of ancient ideas about death and reanimation to captivate human imagination across millennia. The ancient Egyptian approach to preserving religious and funerary texts also ensured that their beliefs about the afterlife and the dangers of improper death would survive to be studied and interpreted by future generations. Documents like the Book of the Dead, pyramid texts, and coffin texts provide detailed instructions for navigating the afterlife and reveal the complexity of Egyptian theology regarding death, judgment, and resurrection. These texts describe various dangers that could befall a soul in the afterlife, including demons, hostile deities, and the potential for total annihilation if one failed the judgment of Osiris. The preservation of these beliefs in written form allowed them to influence later religious and philosophical traditions, including certain aspects of early Christian thought about bodily resurrection and the relationship between the physical and spiritual aspects of human existence. In comparing ancient Egyptian undead mythology with modern zombie narratives, we can see both universal themes and culturally specific variations that reveal something profound about human nature and our relationship with death. Both ancient Egyptians and modern audiences share a fundamental anxiety about the boundary between life and death being breached, though the specifics of how this manifests reflect their respective cultural contexts and dominant belief systems. The ancient Egyptian version emphasized individual souls, moral judgment, and the importance of proper ritual, while modern zombie stories often focus on collective threats, biological explanations, and survival in the face of overwhelming odds. Yet both serve similar psychological functions. They allow us to confront our fears about mortality, explore questions about what makes us human, and consider the consequences of failing to honor the dead or maintain social order. Ancient Egyptian civilization's sophisticated engagement with death and the afterlife created a rich mythology that, while different from modern zombie concepts, addressed similar fundamental human concerns about what happens when the dead do not rest peacefully. Their beliefs about the undead were inseparable from their complex religious worldview, which saw death not as an ending, but as a transformation that required careful navigation and proper observance of ritual. The impact of these ancient beliefs continues to resonate in modern culture, inspiring countless retellings and reinterpretations that adapt Egyptian imagery and ideas to contemporary contexts. By examining how the ancient Egyptians understood the undead, we gain not only historical knowledge, but also insight into the enduring human need to make sense of death, to maintain connections with those who have passed, and to establish boundaries between the worlds of the living and the dead that we hope will protect us from our deepest fears about mortality and what might lie beyond.